What role have banks got to play in these transformations that are going through? I mean, they are the oil that business requires on to actually do business.
Look, I think obviously banks are looking for a return on their money, and they're investing money. They want to make sure that that's done in a risk-weighted way, that on a probability risk-weighted basis, they're getting their return on capital themselves. So that's ultimately their purpose. But they have a vital role to play in oiling the wheels of enterprise and of society as a whole. And so what happened in 2008 with the global financial crisis, when effectively that economic system of the banks seized up. There was no liquidity. People didn't get money. Money doesn't go into the economies. The economies stop functioning. It's like a heart attack. It causes a heart attack to the system. So they have a vital facilitational role in economies. In particular companies, there's obviously a provision of liquidity in the form of debt finance, equity finance, and so on and so forth. But there's also, I think, a very active role that banks play in terms of idea generation. What can companies be doing within the industry to compete in the industries? What can companies be doing to reorganize to be more effective? How do they attract shareholder interest? How do they unlock value through taking businesses that are low multiple value creators and separating them from high multiple value creators, and trying to get a greater than the sum of the parts valuation for the whole enterprise. So there's many layers. There's many layers at which banks are operating. No question, they need to be regulated very actively, because the societal impacts of banks, as we saw the global financial crisis in the negative, and at the same time in many instances in the positive, they have a dramatic impact on the functioning of society.
Do you think they need to be, actually a different way to ask that one, if we've got all of the other industries and CEOs having to really take a detailed look at this conscious capitalism and the sustainable development goals, you've got startups popping up everywhere who are using that to go and design brilliant new products and services. Are banks going to have to make a similar move? And I'm going to ask a really naive question to sort of put context. Can we imagine a time where banks actually stop lending to some of the dirty industries?
Well, I think there's certainly a start of that process. Where in Goldman Sachs, there was a very clear set of guidelines as to what one could fund within certain parameters. So there are layers of that. There's really things that you're not allowed to fund, including those things that government says are sanctioned countries or industries or things like that. Then there's a bunch of things that are internally layered by the bank on itself, that they don't want to be investing, for example, in the coal industry. There was a layer of things that either couldn't be done, or processes through which you had to go before you could fund or invest or advise on any one of those industries. So that process that horse is bolted long time ago. One wouldn't have been able to fund the marijuana industry, 20 years ago. Now that industry is opened up because of societal change. Will it be that you won't be able to finance the casino industry or the tobacco industry or this industry or that industry? It's quite possible. But that's an evolving social contract between the banks and the society.
Do you think we're going to see, this was a conversation I was having with Charles Savage. It goes back to what we said earlier, where you said that the kind of Friedman shareholder only model is really gone, and we've got to move on from that. You can't. You've got to focus on your whole ecosystem, your staff, your customers, society at large. It's just not tolerable anymore, and the system doesn't work. But there's a counter argument looking forward coming through, which says we're seeing more and more retail investors access companies directly through platforms like Robinhood. We're seeing more and more of them getting onto social groups where they're sharing their conversations. And there's this possibility that as customers, maybe we're going into the Nike store or we're going into the Amazon Go shop, you know, in the UK, and we're associating so directly with those organizations because we think they're doing so well, that will become the driver for the share price above and beyond what we're seeing from institutional investors. And that will put pressure on the CEOs to actually care more about their customers and society at large. Again, it's not just a crazy, naive, you know, thought process about where we might be going.
No, look, I think there's technology has, you know, made the world smaller. It's made everything we do more visible. It has created speed, and it has also democratized the tools. So the Robinhood phenomenon, you know, is certainly one where, whereas 20 years ago, there would have been no way in which retail traders could have had this impact on the market at this velocity, that they are able to, you know, sitting on their laptops at home, aggregate through marketplaces and communication a view on a stock and drive it like they have, it seems, done. So the democratization of tools is this kind of its own subset of what is going on. And the fact is the market has become now more accessible, and those tools are in the hands of people who've got a laptop. You don't have to be sitting in a trading room at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank in order to trade shares. And so that whole environment, you know, and the banks are, I think, a lot about, you know, what does that mean in terms of how they can lower the costs and how they can drive debt and equity trading and so on and so forth. So I do think that will transform the way in which you know, financial relations are conducted in the world.
I'm sure you saw earlier in the year, Jamie Dimon, I don't think it was meant to go public, but he was quoted as saying that he is extremely scared about the fintech impact. So he didn't use the word extremely. I won't use the word that he did use. He was quite forceful in his opinion there. And then I was chatting to a colleague of mine, Chris Skinner, who's been on these interviews last year. He's a really interesting thought leader in terms of where we're seeing fintech and banking going. He put a prediction out yesterday that up to 20% of the major banks might end up being purchased by fintech startups of today in about a decade. What's your view on either or of those, you know, statements from these guys?
I think it was about beginning of 2018. I went to see the Apple headquarters and meet with the Apple leadership about Africa at the time. And while I was in Palo Alto, California, near Cupertino, where the Apple headquarters is, I went to see a couple of companies. One of them was Stripe. Stripe is effectively a company a fintech company set up to provide payment systems for businesses. And I went to see them and was having a discussion. Now they're worth tens of billions of dollars now. And I was amazed because the relationship between what they're doing and regulation was almost an afterthought, meaning they were now providing global systems to any party for payments systems so that businesses don't have to have them, effectively outsource these payment systems to Stripe. And I was asking them, so how do you work in an exchange control environment like we have in South Africa, where, you know, companies are constrained by exchange controls? So the world of and they were sort of somewhat taken aback by the question. The world of regulation, and this is going to obviously with cryptocurrencies and so on and so forth, become increasingly worrisome for governments, for central banks, for regulators. How do you control these digitized payment systems in the world in such a manner that you're protecting end-to-end and you're managing the regulatory environment? They're going to have to really apply their minds as to how that practically functions. So it's not just a problem for the banks themselves. It's also a problem for the regulators. For the banks, they have to become far more embedded with fintech themselves. So Goldman Sachs, for example, I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm now no longer at Goldman Sachs. But if you have a look at their consumer plan, what effectively they're doing is using digital tools to...
They had a very cool tie-up with Marcus, didn't they? That was one of the initiatives that was awesome.
And they've got digital tools to access the consumer market at the moment, the United States and the UK, and doing extremely well. Then you've got the JP Morgan, model which has been built with the infrastructure that goes along with branches over many years. That's extraordinarily powerful. And over time will tell, what would you rather be? Would you rather be a Goldman Sachs with a fintech arm that you're going to grow, or would you rather be JP Morgan with the power of the physical branches, the relationships, the people networks that go along? I mean, the market says, the market cap of JP Morgan, something like $300 billion. The market cap of Goldman Sachs, about $115 billion. So there's lots of upside potential. And then you've got these fintech companies like Stripe that are going to be very, very large. They're not just small startups. They were, but now they're very substantial and powerful market players.